Now, the clean-up continues today following the weather crisis, which saw the country go into a shutdown status. Orange snow ice warning remains in place for a number of counties with the risk of localised flooding in parts. Joining us with that story and everything else making the news this morning are Public Affairs Consultant Gerald Howlin and Director of the Irish Academy for Public Relations, Ellen Gunning. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
As the country tries to get back to normal, I suppose the first thing we all want to know is what's on and what's off. And so you've been going through the official briefings there, Ellen. It does seem like most things are back to normal, aren't they?
It does. Actually, we seem to have coped with it very well. Wexford seems to have come out of it very badly.
West Wicklow as well.
The schools are closed in Wexford. They have all sorts of water issues. 11,000 of the 18,000 homes in Wexford that are without water are in Wexford. That's been very badly hit. Wicklow and Kildare seem to be still very badly hit. But with that exception, most of the main roads seem to be open. Most of the electricity seems to have been restored. There are still pockets. We've actually, considering the country more or less went into lockdown for 2 or 3 days, we seem to have survived it pretty well.
Gerard, Wexford is your bailiwick, isn't it?
I was talking to my mother last night in Murntown, the Redshire Road. Water expected back, hadn't come back, so they're hoping for the best today. Taxi driver this morning lives in Selbridge. No water in Selbridge, or at least not in the part of Selbridge where he is. He was telling of another taxi story, by the way. On the main roads were clear, took a man from the airport to Maynooth, couldn't get any further than the centre of Maynooth, and the man had to take a suitcase out and trudge as best he could off to his final destination. But it is getting back to normal today. Flights are back to normal, but what isn't gone away are the backlogs. So in hospitals, if it's not urgent and if it's a day case, there's a high likelihood that it might be put back. And similarly, of course, those flights are running as normal, but all those people who are trying to get those extra seats, you know, to make up for the last few days, I'm sure that it will still take a few days.
It's interesting, though, that the children's hospitals are going ahead with non-emergency surgery today. That was part of the briefing, that adults have been told if it's not an emergency, if it's routine surgery, don't come in. But the children's hospitals are doing routine surgery, which is good.
OK, the other thing that has to be said is, look, I think the government, in terms of its preparations, the National Emergency Committee, and all of the support and local authority services and all the rest, they've all played a blinder. A lot of them haven't had proper sleep or rest for a couple of days. I know in our own family that one of ours works for the ESB. They were heading off down to Wexford yesterday. They said they'll be down there till the middle of the week, so they won't see families for a week. But also there's a huge community and neighbourhood effort as well. I mean, I think all of us, our producer this morning has footage of, in his local estate out in Blanchardstown, there are 40 people out there digging roads up, and it's been a colossal community and neighbourhood effort. And it's amazing in times of, I hesitate to use the word crisis, but I suppose it was, the way people really just roll their sleeves up and we become a community, we become a proper people again.
We actually start talking to people who are neighbours that we don't talk to from one end of the week to the other, because we're inclined to all get into cars. We move in and out all the time. We wave at people, but we don't really communicate. On the Thursday, I think, I was actually looking out the window because I was battened down in the house, and one of the neighbours came out from next door, and I was watching him trudge to the neighbour beside. And he called in, obviously, to see was there anything they wanted, because they were older people, and came back with messages and called back in again with milk and bread. And there were a couple, they'd be a very private couple, you wouldn't normally call into them. I thought it was lovely to see it.
And I think that's probably happened 100,000 times over the last couple of days.
All over the country.
Well, it's the Blitz. You know, obviously none of us were around for that, but, you know, in crisis, people do come together. And barriers, you see, these artificial barriers about being very private, you can't sustain them if you don't have bread and milk.
Speaking of that, I saw more bread vans on the road on the way in this morning than I have done. I must have seen about 6 of them between Johnson, Mooney, O'Brien, Mother's Pride and Brennan. So God bless all the bakeries. Just in terms of how the government did it, you know, from a PR point of view, Ellen, I mean, they've taken a lot of stick over 2040, and quite rightly so. But in terms of what they did around this, how they got the public information out, how they helped to allay public fears, how they managed to I think, to get all the relevant information that people actually needed out, I think you'd have to give them an A+, wouldn't you?
I thought they were really very good, and I did hear somebody commenting that they saw too much of the Taoiseach and that too much of a fuss was made of this weather. I don't think that's right. I think the weather virtually closed the country down for 3 days. I think what they did was they had constant communication. They let everybody know what was going on. They gave them great advice. I thought they played a blinder. I would definitely have given them an A+ for it.
Very quickly, Gerald, before we go, I have to mention, of course, Theresa May made her most major speech on Brexit since Florence. And I was very interested to watch Simon Coveney's reaction on the BBC yesterday morning. What did you make of it?
Well, basically, there was a Monday 3 or 4 weeks ago when Leo Varadkar and Theresa May met in Stormont. There was expected to be a breakthrough in the Northern Ireland talks. That didn't happen. But they had a sidebar conversation about Brexit, and she took away a thought that transplanted itself into her speech about some sort of side process with the Republic of Ireland. But what Leo Varadkar and Simon Coveney on his behalf have been very clear about is, of course, our nearest neighbour. There will be, contact all the time. But ultimately, Britain's negotiations are with the European Union. There will not be a sidebar negotiation with the Republic of Ireland, because if there is a sidebar negotiation, we will be left to the sideline.
Is that a ploy on their part? Are they trying to literally separate us from the herd?
There would be a bit of that, I suppose. There was also, I suppose, a natural looking to us to exert some influence on their behalf in Brussels, because there is a coincidence of interests. But nonetheless, I think there's a bit of a fantasy here. It comes back, by the way, to that over-the-top. But in the way that over-the-top remarks can sometimes be telling, Boris Johnson, that he ran London and the boundary between Camden and Westminster. These people, even though Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom, they don't know it, they don't understand it, they fundamentally have no interest in it, they don't get it. And when you have that sort of dismissive, denigrating remark from Johnson, while I don't think May is in that space that he is, it's very telling about how trivial they think this remote border far away from their interests and experiences.
Do you know the amazing thing with Theresa May, though? If you looked at the way she spoke, she was so positive. It's the most positive I've seen her. I'm not sure if she actually believes that this new tripartite arrangement bringing Ireland in was actually part of it, but she sounded so positive when she was talking to Andrew Marr on the BBC. I thought she actually felt like, for once, they knew where they were going.
Do you know what? I was talking to Gerald about this morning, and I watched yesterday, and I couldn't get my head around. I couldn't make sense of it. But I've come to the conclusion that this way that we've painted them, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're at. They know exactly what they're at. They just don't care how it affects the rest of us. And I think maybe people would say that's an oversimplification of it, but when you actually think of the arrogance of the empire mentality, I think how they're dealing with this is the absolute personification of it. And it's, listen, we're off and you can sort out the problem. We don't care. And, and we'll cause you as much trouble as we like on the way out. And sure, who cares?
Well, John,
not only do we not want to pay to be in this club, but we think actually you should pay us to leave. Anyway, look, we're going to have to leave it at that because they're screaming at me in my ear. You can shoot me if I'm wrong, but it was quite extraordinary watching it yesterday morning. Now, plenty more to come on the programme, and then we'll be back after this break.